My name is Susan Williamson. I'm 32 years old, and if I'd listened to my instincts that night, I could have spared myself years of self-doubt. But love has a way of muting the alarms you should hear the loudest. The West family mansion looked like something out of an old film. Marble steps, trimmed hedges, a fountain that didn't so much gurgle as whisper about money. Henry said, "They're not that bad once you get to know them." I wanted to believe him. I'd spent 2 years doing exactly that. Inside, the dining table stretched farther than my apartment's entire living room. Every glass sparkled as though auditioning for a luxury ad. I could smell rosemary butter and the faint metallic chill of nerves. "Ah, Susan." Margaret West's voice slid across the table like ice water. Her pearls caught the chandelier's glow as she gestured to the chair beside Henry. "We were just discussing the new marketing campaign you're heading. How exciting." I smiled, careful and measured. "It's going well. The launch is next month. I think it'll—" How lovely, she interrupted, eyes drifting toward Henry. "Do you remember dear Caroline's old boyfriend headed a campaign for that fragrance brand in Paris? He's in Singapore now, managing international accounts." Caroline, Henry's sister, sipped her wine and smirked. That man was brilliant and so young to already have global clients. But I suppose creativity comes in all sizes. Henry shifted uncomfortably beside me, pretending to cut his steak. He didn't look up. "Richard West." Henry's father chuckled. "The world needs the dreamers and the doers, don't we, sweetheart? Not everyone can chase skyscrapers." They were polite daggers, wrapped in dinner conversation. I'd learned that from the first night I met them. They never yelled. They never insulted directly. They just built invisible walls and waited for me to run into them. I tried to focus on Henry, on the man I loved. He looked tired, distracted, his smile brittle. "Mom." "Dad, can we just have one dinner without comparing careers?" he said finally. Of course, Margaret cooed, then turned to me. "Tell me, Susan, do you plan to continue working after marriage?" I blinked. Yes, of course." Caroline laughed softly. "Adorable. You'd be surprised how demanding Henry's world is. Mother says to thrive in his circles, one must make certain sacrifices." Their words pressed against me, invisible fingers tightening around my throat. I forced a smile. "I'm not afraid of hard work." Richard nodded, feigning approval. "That's the spirit. Though, of course, Henry will need someone who can keep up. The partners' dinners, the charity galas." "Dad?" Henry's voice sharpened, but he didn't meet my eyes. Margaret's tone sweetened further. "We only want what's best for our son. You understand, don't you, dear?" I did. I understood perfectly. In their eyes, I was a charming detour, not a destination. The air between us was tight metallic. I could feel the chandelier heat against my skin. I excused myself to the restroom halfway through dessert. Inside, I leaned over the marble sink and looked at my reflection. My lipstick was flawless, but my smile wasn't. "You're an outsider," I whispered to myself, "and you keep trying to prove you belong." When I came back, the conversation had turned to the latest real estate purchase of a West family friend. Margaret mentioned the square footage of their vacation home with the same tone one might use to describe a family birth. Henry reached under the table and squeezed my hand, a tiny gesture of apology, but it was too little, too quiet. Dinner ended with practiced smiles and hollow goodbyes. On our drive back, the hum of the tires filled the silence. Finally, Henry sighed. "I'm sorry about them. They don't mean it the way it sounds." "Then how do they mean it?" I asked. He glanced at me, eyes tired. "They just want to protect me." A bitter laugh rose in my throat. "From what? From someone who can't afford their brand of silverware." "Susan, please." His tone turned defensive, weary. "It's complicated." "No," I said quietly. "It's simple. They don't think I'm enough." He didn't argue. That silence told me everything. Outside, the city lights flickered against the windshield reflections of lives shinier than ours. I pressed my forehead against the glass, letting the coolness ground me. "I love you," I said softly, more to myself than to him. "But I'm starting to think your world doesn't have room for me." He didn't answer. When he dropped me off at my apartment, he kissed my cheek instead of my lips. A polite, distant gesture. The kind you give to a guest, not a partner. As I watched his taillights fade, a thought crossed my mind, quiet, chilling, undeniable. If they ever made you choose Henry, I already know who you'd pick. I closed my door and leaned against it. The apartment was dark, silent. My phone buzzed a text from him. "Love you. Don't overthink tonight." I stared at the screen, my reflection ghosting in the black glass. The alarms were blaring now. I just didn't want to hear them. The next month was a haze of hope, stitched together with denial. Henry and I had started house hunting again, a ritual of half-formed dreams. I told myself the West dinner had been a bad night, that love could outlast humiliation. We found the house on a Sunday afternoon, a modest craftsman tucked between two maples, sunlight pooling on the porch like spilled honey. It wasn't perfect, but it felt right. Henry grinned, hands on his hips. "It's got good bones," he said. I laughed. "You sound like a home inspector." He smirked. "No, just a man who can see potential." Inside, the air smelled of dust and nostalgia. Wood floors creaked. Walls wore pale scars of old picture frames. "This corner," I said, pointing. "We'll put the Christmas tree here." He nodded. "And a swing in the backyard." We were designing a future blueprint by blueprint. I should have noticed that every time I said we, Henry's smile thinned a little. The following week, I drained my savings for the down payment. It was every cent I had, but I didn't care. It wasn't just a house. It was proof that we were building something ours. The night before we were set to sign, I packed the first box mugs, spoons my grandmother's tea set. The air buzzed with excitement, sharp and electric. Henry came home late from work, his tie-loosened eyes darting. He didn't kiss me. He didn't even take off his shoes. He just stood in the doorway, pale and silent. "Susan," he said softly, "we need to talk." My pulse stuttered. Those 4 words, every breakup starts with them. About the house, I asked. "Don't tell me the lender." "It's not the lender." His voice cracked on the second word. "It's us." For a moment, everything inside me froze, even my breathing. "What do you mean, us?" He rubbed his temples. "I've been thinking. My family. They made me realize things. You deserve stability, security." I let out a small, disbelieving laugh. "Security? I'm the one paying the down payment, Henry." His eyes flinched at that. "I met someone," he said finally. "Her name's Vanessa. She's a partner at a law firm." The room tilted. The tape dispenser slipped from my fingers and hit the floor with a hollow clatter. "You met someone?" The words burned as they left my throat. "When?" He couldn't look at me. "A few months ago." Months. So while I was saving, dreaming, sketching color palettes, he was auditioning replacements. "She understands my world," he continued. "She knows the kind of life." I cut him off. "Your mother would approve of her." His silence was confirmation. I stood there, surrounded by boxes labeled "Kitchen Books Us." Everything suddenly absurd. "So what happens now?" "I can't buy the house," he said quietly. "It wouldn't be fair." "Fair," I repeated, voice trembling. "You let me drain my savings. Let me sign those papers. And now you're talking about fair." He took a step forward. "Susan." "Don't," I said sharply. "You don't get to comfort me after this." He sighed. "My family says I can't build a future with someone who doesn't belong." That word belong sliced deeper than any insult. I turned away before he could see my tears. "Then go," I said. "Marry the world you belong to." He hesitated. "Susan, please don't do this." "Do what?" "Have self-respect." I met his gaze for the last time. "You said I deserve security. Maybe I'll find it when you're gone." He left quietly, the door closing with an almost polite click. For a long time, I just stood there. The apartment hummed with absence. Then something in me shifted, a fragile, furious clarity. I picked up the fallen tape dispenser, set it gently on top of the nearest box, and whispered, "It's still mine." The next morning, I walked into the title office alone. The receptionist blinked at me. "Miss Williamson, will Mr. West be joining you?" "No," I said steady, "it's just me." The signing felt endless forms, initials, signatures that blurred into defiance. When it was done, the loan officer handed me a key and a look of pity. "Congratulations, Miss Williamson," he said softly. I smiled, the kind that doesn't reach your eyes. "Thank you. I'll take it from here." That night I stood in the empty living room, the key warm in my palm. The silence was enormous, alive. This was supposed to be our beginning. Instead, it was my clean slate. I sat on the floor, back against the bare wall, and whispered into the darkness, "You took the love. I'll keep the dream." Outside, the moonlight pooled through the window, pale and cold, like the start of something I didn't yet understand, freedom disguised as heartbreak. The first night in the new house was both a victory and a funeral. I lay on the hardwood floor in a sleeping bag, staring at the ceiling, listening to the echo of my own breathing. Every creak sounded like Henry's ghost pacing the halls. Every gust of wind whispered the word, almost. The place smelled of plaster and new beginnings, both of which made me nauseous. It was supposed to be our home, the place where I'd wake up beside him, drink coffee with bed hair, argue over where to hang his ridiculous movie posters. Now it was just an empty house with too many rooms and one stubborn heartbeat refusing to give up. For the first few days, I couldn't even unpack. I brushed my teeth using bottled water. I sat on the floor, eating crackers out of the box because I didn't have the energy to cook. The silence was so thick I started talking to myself just to hear a voice. Once standing in the hallway, I caught my reflection in a mirror left by the previous owner. My face looked unfamiliar, tired, swollen, angry. But underneath the exhaustion was something harder, steadier: defiance. By the end of the week, I started walking through the house each morning, naming each space aloud. This is the kitchen. This is the bedroom. This is the life I'm building mine. The words felt absurd at first, but repetition has power. One afternoon, I wandered into a hardware store. I told myself I needed light bulbs, but what I really wanted was to feel like someone who could fix things. I walked the aisles slowly, touching sponges, nails, paintbrushes, the tangible proof of effort. Then I saw a small card labeled Midnight Ocean, a color so deep and bold it looked alive like the sea before a storm. Henry would have hated it. He once told me dark colors made rooms too heavy. I bought a gallon. That night, I dragged an old roller across one living room wall. The first swipe looked terrible, streaky, and uneven, but I kept going. Paint splattered across my arm, my jeans, the floorboards. By the 5th stroke, I was crying. By the 10th, I was laughing. Every movement was violent, cathartic, an exorcism in blue. When the wall was finally coated, I collapsed onto the floor, dizzy with fumes and emotion. The room was Williamson's. Formed not beautiful, not perfect, but mine. The sterile white had been erased. It felt like I had painted a pulse into the house. For the first time in weeks, I slept without dreams. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the windows, bouncing off that bold blue wall. It glowed calm, unapologetic. I made coffee, sitting cross-legged on the bare floor, watching it as though it were alive. "This is home," I whispered. The words didn't tremble anymore. Over the next few days, I bought a single camp chair and placed it right in the center of the room facing the blue wall. Each evening, I sat there quietly. No music, no phone, no ghosts. Just breath. The silence began to change. It no longer pressed down on me, it expanded around me. It became possibility. By the end of the month, I'd built a routine. Mornings, I jogged through the neighborhood. Afternoons, I worked from my laptop by the window. Evenings, I repaired small things, a loose hinge, a dripping faucet. I started a small garden out back. The soil was hard, resistant, like the life I was trying to reclaim. But every seed I planted felt like a promise I will grow too. Sometimes when exhaustion hit me, I'd imagine Henry walking through the door saying he'd made a mistake, asking for forgiveness. In those daydreams, I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I just turned around, looked at my blue wall, and smiled. Because by then I knew something I hadn't known before. He wasn't my loss. He was my lesson. A month after moving in, I got an unexpected text from an unknown number. "Henry, hey, heard you closed on the house. That's brave." I stared at it for a long time. I could picture him sitting in his leather chair, feeling noble for reaching out. I didn't reply. Instead, I picked up a paintbrush and ran it across a piece of scrap wood in the garage just to hear the sound. When people leave, they take the noise with them, but sometimes that's how you finally hear yourself again. That night, I sat in my camp chair facing the blue wall. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't ask for permission. I thought about everything I'd lost and everything I'd learned to live without. For the first time, peace didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like ownership. It had been nearly 3 months since I last heard his voice. 3 months since I'd stopped jumping every time my phone lit up. 3 months since silence became not a punishment, but a luxury. The house had Williamsons formed alongside me. The garden out back was growing unruly but alive. The blue wall in the living room had dried into something deep and velvety, like calm ocean water. It no longer symbolized heartbreak. It symbolized survival. Every nail I hammered, every paint chip I scrubbed off the floor, felt like reclaiming something. Henry and his family had once made me doubt my capability, my worth, my right to belong anywhere I chose. Then one humid afternoon, while sanding the porch railing, my phone rang. The name on the screen froze me in place. Richard West. For a moment, I just stared at that name, the echo of their perfectly enunciated disapproval. Then curiosity won over caution. I pressed accept. Susan came, his voice brittle and measured. "It's Richard West." "I know," I said. My tone was calm, deliberate, too calm. He cleared his throat. "I hope you're doing well." It was the kind of statement you make to someone you don't actually hope is doing well. "I am," I replied simply. The scrape of sandpaper against wood filled the silence that followed. There was a pause, long enough for me to imagine him in his leather chair, pinching the bridge of his nose, rehearsing whatever pride-swallowing words he'd come to deliver. "It's about Henry," he said finally. "We were hoping you'd talk to him." I stopped sanding. Talk to him. "Yes, Richard hesitated, his voice lowering. "He's been going through a difficult time." I waited. Silence again was my weapon. Finally, he exhaled. His engagement to Vanessa ended. She called it off. It was complicated. Complicated. That word used by people who never have to live inside the consequences of their own choices. "I see," I said flatly. "She left him with nothing." There was a faint bitterness creeping into his tone, as if his family had been wronged. No prenup, no settlement. It was humiliating. "Henry's been devastated." I could almost hear the glass of bourbon clinking in his hand, the self-pity dripping through the cracks of privilege. "He's devastated," I repeated softly, testing the weight of the word. "Yes." His voice sharpened, taking on that familiar paternal authority. "And after everything you two shared, Susan, surely you can be the bigger person here." The bigger person. There it was. The phrase that rich people use when they need the people they've hurt to clean up their emotional mess. I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Then I said quietly, "Richard, do you know what your wife told me the first night I met her?" He didn't answer. "She said some people just aren't built for your world." I believed her for a while, but I've realized she was wrong. I'm not built for your world because I don't need to be. I built my own. "Susan, I'm not going to fix what your son broke. Not for him, not for any of you." The sharp inhale on the other end of the line was almost satisfying. Then came the angry politeness I see. "Well, I suppose I shouldn't be surprised." "No," I said gently. "You shouldn't." I hung up before he could say another word. The house was quiet again, save for the rasp of my breath and the heartbeat in my ears. I looked at the railing I'd been sanding, half-finished, rough, uneven. I pressed the paper against it again, harder this time. Each stroke was steadier, more certain. When I was done, I brushed the sawdust away and whispered, "There, smooth again." That night, I made myself a small dinner, pasta and wine, and sat on the porch, watching the sky fade from gold to violet. I expected to feel vindicated. Instead, I felt lighter than I had in years. Because for the first time, I hadn't defended, explained, or apologized. I had simply stood still and refused to be used. I raised my glass to the darkening horizon and murmured, "Being the bigger person doesn't mean letting them shrink you." The next morning, when I went out to water the garden, the soil felt cool and soft beneath my fingers. It struck me that sometimes growth looks exactly like refusal, and sometimes silence is the loudest revenge of all. The first text came 3 days after Richard's call. Unknown number. "Hey, my dad said he talked to you. I'm sorry if that was weird." I stared at the screen. The number wasn't saved, but I knew that tone. Tentative, self-pitying, half-expecting forgiveness. Henry always began his apologies like that, gently, as though testing the water before diving back into comfort. I didn't reply. Instead, I wiped the sweat from my brow, set my phone face down on the porch railing, and went back to repainting the shutters. Each stroke of my brush was deliberate, clean, decisive. By dusk, another message appeared. "Henry, I heard you kept the house. It looks amazing. You were right about that place. It had potential." That word again, potential. He had once used it to describe me too. A woman who could be something, if only she tried harder, aimed higher, fit in better. I deleted the message and blocked the number. But ghosts don't respect locked doors. A week later, a new number popped up. Unknown number. "I drove by the other day. The garden looks incredible. Remember when we talked about planting herbs near the kitchen window?" My stomach turned. He was circling now, reaching for nostalgia like a weapon. I remembered that conversation vividly. He had wanted to plant basil for show. I'd wanted lavender, something that grew wild and didn't care who approved. I deleted the message too. The next morning, I added a small sign at the edge of the lawn. Private property. Not because I feared trespassers, but because boundaries are sometimes physical reminders of emotional ones. By then, I'd started spending more time with James. I met him at a community event, a tall, quiet architect who noticed details the way other people notice faces. He'd admired my blue wall when I showed him a photo, saying, "That shade tells me you're not afraid of stillness." Stillness. The word felt holy in his mouth. We spent our evenings on the porch swing he'd helped me hang. Some nights he brought his sketchbook. Other nights he simply sat beside me, letting silence be comfortable again. The peace between us wasn't dramatic, it was earned. One evening, while we watched the sunset melt behind the rooftops, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Susan, please. Can we talk? Just once. I need to see you. I need to explain. I showed the phone to James. He read the message, then looked at me with gentle amusement. He doesn't like your new color scheme, does he? I laughed a real laugh, the kind that didn't hurt. Something like that. Then maybe James said it's time to block the ghosts for good. And I did. That night I slept deeply. No dreams, no memories. Just the quiet hum of my house breathing around me. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, glinting off the leaves of the herb garden. The basil had died, but the lavender had flourished. As I brewed coffee, I thought about Henry's last message. I need to explain. There was nothing left to explain. He wasn't looking for forgiveness. He was looking for relevance. And I was done giving him that. Later that day, James and I took a walk through the neighborhood. The air smelled like cut grass and rain. Couples waved from porches. Life had resumed its ordinary rhythm, the kind of peace that never made it into movies, but made living worthwhile. As we passed the house across the street, James said quietly, "You know what I like most about your home?" "What?" He smiled. "It feels like it's been waiting for you, not the other way around." I didn't answer right away. My throat tightened in a Swilliam song grateful ache. Because for so long, I had chased belonging and love in families and rooms where I was always the outsider. Now, for the first time, I felt chosen by something I had built myself. That evening, as the sky turned indigo, I sat in my camp chair, facing the blue wall again. It no longer looked like rebellion or grief. It looked like calm, the kind that grows quietly after a storm. I took a deep breath and whispered into the stillness, "You don't need to haunt me anymore." And for the first time, the silence answered back, not with loneliness, but with peace. It was a golden Saturday afternoon, the kind where sunlight feels thick enough to touch, the kind of day that used to belong to other people, the ones who never had to start over from ashes. I was in the front yard, dirt on my hands, planting a young oak sapling near the fence line. James sat on the porch swing I'd hung, sketching something quietly in his notebook. The air smelled like earth and lavender, my favorite combination of clean and stubborn. "This one will outlive us both," I said, pressing the soil around the roots. James smiled without looking up. "Then you'll have built something permanent." I was about to answer when I heard the low hum of a car slowing down. Tires crunched against gravel. My chest tightened before I even turned around. When the engine cut, silence swallowed the street. I straightened up, brushing dirt off my palms, and saw him. Henry. He looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in the way people do when life stops revolving around them. His suit was wrinkled, his expression stripped of that old, polished confidence. Even the way he closed the car door seemed unsure. He stood there for a moment, staring at the house like he was approaching a church where he wasn't welcome anymore. "Susan," he said finally. His voice was soft, cautious, as though testing the air. "You planted the oak tree." "Yes," I said simply. "It's going to have deep roots." He hesitated, eyes darting toward James, who looked up from the swing and gave him a polite nod before closing his notebook. The unspoken message was clear. You're on someone else's ground now. Henry took a step closer. "You look different." "I am." He swallowed hard. "I've thought about you a lot. About everything that happened." I said nothing. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of fresh soil between us. "I made a mistake," he blurted finally. "Vanessa, it was never real. My family, they pushed me into it. They made me think I needed someone who fit their world. But they were wrong. I was wrong." He took another step forward, desperation flickering in his eyes. "I lost everything. The firm, the engagement, their respect. But losing you, that's the one thing I can't seem to recover from." I stared at him, calm as the sky above us. "Henry, when you left, I thought I'd never recover either. But I did. The thing about survival is that once you learn it, you can't unlearn it." He blinked as if the words physically hurt. "Can't we try again?" "You loved me once." "I did," I said quietly. "But that version of me doesn't live here anymore." He looked at the garden, the porch, the blue wall, visible through the front window. Everything he'd dismissed as small or simple was now thriving. It must have stung. "You rebuilt everything," he whispered. "Yes," I said, "but not to prove anything to you. I did it to prove it to myself." He reached into his pocket, pulling out something, a photo. Us smiling in front of a for sale sign 2 years ago. "I kept this," he said, "because part of me thought one day, maybe—" "Henry," I interrupted gently, "you shouldn't have come here." His shoulders sagged. "I just needed to say I'm sorry." "I know," I replied, "but some apologies aren't meant to be heard. They're meant to be lived." Behind me, I felt James's presence, steady, quiet, not possessive, but protective in that grounding way only real peace can be. Henry followed my gaze, his eyes softening when he saw James. You found someone new. I found peace, I said simply. He just happens to live in it too. He nodded, a faint broken smile flickering across his face. You always were stronger than me. No, I corrected. I just stopped trying to convince people like you that I was. He stood there for another moment, as if waiting for something. Maybe forgiveness, maybe permission to let go. When I didn't speak again, he gave a small nod. Goodbye, Susan. Goodbye, Henry. He turned back to his car. The engine started, and the sound grew distant until it was just another noise swallowed by the neighborhood quiet. I didn't watch him leave. Instead, I knelt by the oak sapling, cupping the soil around its roots firm and deliberate. My hands were dirty, my heart clean. James came down from the porch and crouched beside me. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just placed a warm hand on my shoulder, steady and sure. After a long silence, I whispered. He came looking for the life he threw away. James's voice was low, gentle, and he found you already living it. I smiled, eyes on the little tree. Good. Let him see what real growth looks like. The wind stirred the leaves soft and new brushing against my fingertips. In that moment, I understood the house was no longer a monument to pain or defiance. It was something simpler, a space where everything false had been stripped away, leaving only truth. The blue wall inside glowed faintly in the sunlight. Not sad, not angry, just alive. Peace isn't something you find, I whispered. It's something you build one wall, one seed, one breath at a time. James squeezed my shoulder. We stood together as the sun slipped lower gold light scattering across the yard. The oak swayed gently in the breeze, fragile yet certain of its place. I looked at it and smiled. This time the silence around me wasn't empty. It was home.